Okay, so what I want to do today is tell you guys a story called Master and Man by T. Crofton Crocker. Now, just like all the other stories I've told you before, I'm going to add a couple of parts to make it even better. Now, before we even start this story, we need to talk about what a leprechaun is. Now, leprechauns are very small, about this big. They wear bright green clothes and they have red hair, like red beards and red hair. And they wear a little top hat and they wear shoes with golden buckles. Leprechauns have lots and lots of gold. And the reason for that is because they make shoes for fairies. And so, because they're very rich, they like to make sure their riches all in one place, and they'll hide all of their gold at the end of a rainbow. Now, leprechauns, they tend to like to get into trouble, and they like to play pranks on people. But if you can catch a leprechaun, and you can make sure he doesn't escape, you can get that leprechaun to give his gold to you, or even better, grant you wishes. Regardless, they're pretty interesting creatures. Okay, so now that you know what leprechauns are, let's get started with the story. Well, there was a man named Billy, and he lived in Ireland, and night had already fallen. The sky was completely dark, and he had been at the pub, or the bar, for a really long time. He was extremely drunk, but it was time to leave, and so he was walking home really drunk, and he walked into the forest, because he had to get through the forest to get to his house. And there was lots of trees, really thick trees, and it's in the middle of the night, so it's really dark, and you can hear owls, screeching and hooting. And he's too drunk to be scared, but he looks at his empty mug that had ale in it, or alcohol in it, and he said, I wish I had another pint. And right when he said that, out of nowhere, he heard this little weird noise, and he looked down, and there was this little person with green clothes on and a red beard. It was a leprechaun, and he was holding a big, mug for alcohol, and he said, "Never wish it twice, Billy." Well, Billy, being too drunk to think about what was going on, grabs the mug and drinks it all the way down and goes, "Thanks." Well, after Billy had finished his drink, he was just kind of standing there with a stupid smile on his face, and the leprechaun tugged on his shirt and held out his hand. He said, "Payment for your drink." And he's like, "What? I don't want to pay for this." And then the leprechaun gets angry. He says, "Billy, wishes aren't free, you know." He's like, "Well, I didn't mean to." And the leprechaun gets angry and he says, "You'll work for me 5 years in a day, Billy, my boy. And if you don't, it'll be worse for you." Well, before Billy could say anything, the leprechaun says, "You meet me tomorrow night in the field by your house, or else." And then the leprechaun disappeared. Well, Billy is now kind of sober because it scared him so bad. And he walks home and he's at his house and he doesn't sleep that whole night. He's just too scared because leprechauns are a type of fairy, and they have magic. This leprechaun could do a lot of things to him, and it kind of scares him. So he decides, I bet just better do what the leprechaun wants me to do and be his servant. Well, finally night falls again, and he goes to the field by his house at midnight, and the leprechaun appears to meet him. Well, he sees his little master standing there in the middle of the field, and the leprechaun says, "You're a smart boy, Billy. It's a good thing you came. Now, what I want you to do is go to my stable and fetch my horses." Well, Billy, trying to be a good servant, he walks out to the field, out away from the leprechaun, and then he realizes, "I don't know where your stable is." And he looks at the leprechaun. He's like, "Excuse me, master, but where is your stable?" And the leprechaun rolls his eyes. "Go out into the woods, break off a couple of branches, and bring them back over here." And so he goes, okay. And, he's still trying to be, a good servant. So he runs out to the woods, breaks off a couple of branches, and comes back. Well, the leprechaun says, "Give me a branch." He hands the branch to the leprechaun. The leprechaun takes the branch, straddles over it, as if he was riding a horse, and he looks at Billy. Billy's kind of confused. He's like, "What are you doing?" He says, "You take the other branch and do the same thing." Well, Billy doesn't want to do that. It kind of makes him look dumb. He's a full-grown man. But you're not going to go against what the leprechaun wants, because who knows, maybe he could kill you with magic or something. So he straddles over his branch, trying to be a good servant, and then the leprechaun snaps his fingers. And before he knows it, the branch starts to shake, and it turns into this horse made of wood. It was magic. Well, they're trotting along on their wooden horses, and the leprechaun says, "We're going to go to that house." And he's pointing to the richest man in all of their village's house. He's like, okay, we'll go there. And they ride up, they stop their horses, and, the leprechaun gets off of his, and he walks up to the door, and he says, Billy, are you coming or not? And Billy goes, oh, sorry, sir. And then he gets off the horse, runs up right next to the leprechaun, and the leprechaun says, grab onto my shoulder. So he grabs onto the shoulder, and then the leprechaun snaps his fingers. They turn super small, and then they go through the keyhole in the middle of the doorknob. They walk through the keyhole, and Billy's just fascinated. He's never done anything like this before. They jump out from the doorknob on the other side, and then the leprechaun snaps his fingers again, and they're back to full size. He says, now let's go find the wine cellar. And so they go into the wine cellar, and they start drinking this poor man's wine. And they pretty much drink all of it. They're having a grand old time. They're laughing and singing, and luckily nobody woke up. And they're talking. They realize, well, we better head home. Well, they go back out through the doorknob by shrinking and getting big again. They get on their wooden horses, and they go back out to the field. And the sun is just starting to rise. And the leprechaun turns to Billy and says, now, meet me again tomorrow, and we're going to do it again. And Billy smiles and says, yes, master. Now, if you remember, Billy agreed to serve this leprechaun for 5 years and a day. But he only served this leprechaun for only a couple of years. Now, next time I'm going to tell you why he didn't serve the full time and why the leprechaun didn't want Billy in his service anymore.